Hi guys, today I'm going to be doing my favourite books of 2016 video, which I've basically been waiting to make since last year because it's one of my favourite videos to do. I just love talking about my favourite books. I'm just going to get on with it because there's quite a lot of them. I haven't chosen 10, I've chosen all of my favourite books because narrowing it down to 10 would have been impossible. So I split it up into different categories and I'm just going to get started. So the first category includes my favourite books that are either standalones or first books in series, trilogies or duologies, because there's a duology, so we can't leave the duology out. So the first book I want to talk to you about is Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. I read this near the start of the year, but I love it just as much now as when I first read it, which I think just goes to show how much I love it. This is about a girl called Frances who is head girl of her school. She's really ambitious and she wants to go to one of the best universities in the UK, so it's all about school pressure and stress, but also about friendship. I really love Alice's books because they are so character driven, because the characters feel so real. So I would highly recommend Radio Silence, especially if you are in school, because I feel like you'll really relate to the feelings of stress and pressure. We all have it and it's not fair. The next book on my favourites list is Love Song by Sophia Bennett. Again, I read this one earlier in the year but I haven't forgotten it. It is a boy band lit book, so if you are a fan of One Direction or 5 Seconds of Summer or any other boy band, you're gonna love this because the band in this, The Point, feel real. I wish I could listen to their music, I wish they were actually real, because Sophia invokes this feeling of fandom and fangirl culture really well, but also has a main character who is kind of separate to that. So she goes on a journey of her own and I thought it was brilliant. And the thing I love about boy band books is that even if they're not the most feasible things, you can't help but love them, you can't help but want to be in the book. They just have that effect on me and I love them and I want to read more because it really appealed to me, so it is brilliant. I didn't expect to have a Cassandra Clare book on my list this year because I've kind of moved on from my Cassandra Clare obsession, but I could not do a favourites list without including Lady Midnight because I read this earlier in the year. It is about 700 pages, but I read this in I think 2 or 3 days, which I think is a record for me for a Cassandra Clare book, and I loved it. I just love the Shadowhunter books anyway, but there was something about this one that I really loved. I was really excited to read this one because I think I've been waiting so long for it, so I think that's why I loved it so much, because I was really anticipating it. I've been waiting for years since the last book. I just loved it even more, I think, because of that wait. This is about a girl called Emma and her parabatai Julian, which is, if you don't know the Shadowhunter books, this unbreakable bond where they go and fight together. But Emma and Julian are in love and parabatai cannot be in love. It is absolutely forbidden by the Shadowhunter Council, the Clave. So there's a few problems here and there's also lots of supernatural goodness going on in the background. I cannot wait for the next book, which I think is called Lord of Shadows, I think. And that's coming out next year, so I would definitely be reading that. Then we have a book that I read recently and completely fell head over heels in love with, and it is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I read Shadow and Bone a few years ago. I didn't love it that much, so I decided to read Six of Crows because everybody was talking about it, and I am so glad that I did because this book is amazing. It's about a gang of criminals who go on this impossible heist, but the thing I loved the most about it was the characters themselves. They are very different in many ways, but they are also the kind of characters where you're not sure if you should love them or you should hate them because they aren't morally good in every single way, and I like that about it because I actually mostly root for the bad guys in books. I loved Six of Crows. I'm going to be reading Crooked Kingdom as soon as I possibly can because I am so in love with these books now. And then the final book in this category that I want to talk to you about is one that actually comes out in February 2017, but I read it earlier this year and I love it. And it is Unconventional by Maggie Harcourt. This is set in a comic convention, a bit like Comic-Con, and it is all about fandom and the love of books, and the main character has this really sweet romance that's kind of different to anything I've read, and I think that Maggie Harcourt is the UK's answer to Rainbow Rowell because it just had that feeling to it. It's a feeling that I can't quite explain, but if you've read any Rainbow Rowell book you will know how that feels because she's one of my favourite authors, and now Maggie Harcourt is one of my favourite authors because I adored this book. It's so special and I just want everybody to read it as soon as it comes out. And the next category is sequels that I've read this year. I've read some really good sequels, and the first one that I want to talk to you about is actually my favourite book of the year, and that is The Last Beginning by Lauren James. I read this back in the summer and I don't know how to fully convey how much I love it because it is the sequel to The Next Together, but it follows a different character. If you've read The Next Together, then you might have a clue who this character is, because it ended on quite a cliffhanger, and so the switch of perspective is really interesting. The way that Lauren ties everything up is fantastic, and I do not know how she did it. When I was reading it, I was constantly gasping in surprise, and I had to put the book down at so many points just to be like, what just happened here? How did Lauren do that? She must have some magical powers. Lauren is one of my favourite authors, and I just love all of her books, and she's amazing, and please go and buy her books because they are so good. Then we have Mafiosa by Catherine Doyle, which comes out in January, and it is the last book in the Blood for Blood trilogy, and I've already reread this about 50 times. It came through my door, and as soon as I opened the parcel, I started reading it, and I finished it in a night because I was obsessed. And the best thing about these books is that they read like films. I feel like I'm watching them. I don't feel like I'm reading a book because everything is so vivid, the characters are brilliant, there's so much drama and action, and there is not a dull moment. So if you haven't read any of these books yet, you definitely should. And if you have read them but are waiting on Mafiosa, you are going to love it. It will not disappoint. Then we have possibly my second favourite book of the year. I'm not really sure when it comes after that, but I adored it. And it is How Hard Can Love Be by Holly Bourne. This is a part of the Spinster Club trilogy. This is the second book, but I think you could probably read this as a standalone because they all work in that kind of way. And the main character in this is Amber, whose mum runs a summer camp in America. So Amber goes over there for the summer. They've got quite a strained relationship, so it deals a lot with family relationships and how they can be very different, and also has the best romance I've read, I think, all year. And so I was kind of dragging out the last chapters because I didn't want it to end, because I think Amber is my favourite of the three Spinster Club girls. I also liked how it had a romance in there and how that linked in with the feminism stuff. It kind of discussed how you can be a feminist in a relationship. I thought that was really interesting. Major love for this book. And then the final sequel I want to show you is one I'm so excited about still because I can't believe it's actually a thing, and it is Remembrance by Meg Cabot, and this is the latest book in the Mediator series, which is a YA series, but this is an adult book with the main character Suze, who is now older in this book, and it is everything I have always wanted. Oh my gosh, I can't believe Meg Cabot has been writing adult books. She also wrote one for the Princess Diaries, and I love all of her books. Meg Cabot is like my most read author. I've read pretty much all of her books, and Remembrance did not disappoint. They are about a girl called Suze who is a mediator, which means she can see ghosts, and she's really kick-ass, and she's just such a brilliant character, and Meg Cabot is an amazing writer, and I'm still in awe that this is a thing. I love Meg Cabot so much. I want to find her and hug her and just thank her for writing this book. Now on to classics, and the first one I want to talk to you about is of course a Bronte book, because could I do a wrap up without talking about a Bronte book? I highly doubt it, to be honest. And it is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. My copy of this is so destroyed because I took it everywhere with me because I couldn't put it down. I read this in October for Victober, and I'm so glad I read it because it's one of my favourite Bronte books now. It is equal to Wuthering Heights in my opinion, but it's so underrated and not enough people have read it, and I want to change that. So please go and read The Tenant of Wildfell Hall if you haven't, because it's incredibly subversive about a woman called Helen who leaves her husband, she takes her child, and she runs away, and that is totally unheard of in Victorian times. It is one of those books that you read and you're like, did I just read that? How was Anne Bronte writing about something like this in Victorian times when everything was so secret and hushed, and she was writing so ahead of her time? She's one of the first feminist writers in my opinion, and I love her. She's my girl. I love you, Anne. I love you. On to my little miscellaneous category, and the first book I want to talk to you about is a poetry book that I read this year, and it is Hold Your Own by Kate Tempest. Not really sure how to describe this because it kind of tells a story of somebody, I think, who is bitten by a snake and then changes gender, and so the poems are kind of about that, but there's also lots of other stuff thrown in, so there's not kind of one way that I can describe this book. Kate Tempest is an incredibly talented poet, and I think if you're a bit reluctant to read poetry, if you're not too sure about it, this would be a great place to start. And then the other book I want to talk to you about is a graphic novel, my favourite graphic novel. I read a lot more this year, but this is definitely number one, and it is The 100 Nights of Hero by Isabel Greenberg, who is my favourite graphic novelist anyway. But this is about two women called Cherry and Hero, and Cherry's husband wants to kind of test her, and so he gets a man to try and seduce her, and Cherry and Hero are actually having a relationship behind Cherry's husband's back, and Cherry and and her husband have never consummated their marriage, and so what Cherry and Hiro do is tell stories to the man that's trying to seduce Cherry to distract him, and this goes on for 100 nights. I think that's a bit like Arabian Nights, but I don't know a lot about that. But there are lots of different stories thrown in, some that I really loved. The illustrations are great, and Isabel Greenberg is amazing at writing stories and weaving these mythological, magical tales that feel like they could be part of your own folklore. I would read anything she wrote or illustrated. And then the final category is non-fiction, and I read lots of non-fiction again this year, which is a really nice surprise. I didn't expect to read so much, but there are 3 clear favourites, and the first one is Becoming by Laura Jane Williams, who is a blogger. This is an autobiographical work about Laura after her boyfriend dumped her and went off with her best friend and then married her, and the story kind of goes from there and how that had an effect on her. But it's the later stuff in this book that I really loved, when she goes to Italy. I just loved the feel of it, and my favourite bit in here is the part where Laura writes a letter to herself, and it just starts with, "You're the heroine of your own life," and sometimes I just read that and I think it's a really nice message, and I really liked it. I thought it was amazingly written. Every word feels very calculated to a purpose of making you love it even more, and I really love that. She's a really talented writer. I would highly recommend this. Then we have Control-Alt-Delete How I Grew Up Online by Emma Gannon, who I adore. She's one of my favourite people on the internet, and this documents her life as she grew up on the internet, which I could really relate to because I've pretty much always been on the internet. I think I was born on the internet. The internet has been such a big part of my life, so to read Emma's kind of stories about the internet, I could just relate to them so much. I loved it. I thought it was really well written. I think Emma is really interesting, and she also runs an amazing blog too, plus a podcast where she interviews lots of people from the internet about the internet. If you haven't read this book, you need to. It's just so good. And then the final book on my list is Girl Up by Laura Bates. I'm not entirely sure how to describe it, so I'm just going to read some of the chapters to you. So they include Fake Book, Fitter and Instaglam, You Aren't Your Body, Mean Girls and Mental Health, Sluts, Unicorns and Other Mythical Creatures, and just so many more chapters. It's all about like sexuality and growing up a girl, and I think if you're a teenager you're gonna enjoy this because there's a lot of informational stuff, but it's also really funny at the same time and also really enlightening. It feels quite interactive because there are diagrams and illustrations, and I thought it was a really good guide to growing up being a girl, and I also thought it was very inclusive as well. So I think this would make a nice present for somebody who's maybe struggling with being a teenager and growing up. I feel like I could have really benefited from this as I was getting older. I just thought it was really great, and I want to read more by Laura Bates now, who is behind the Everyday Sexism Project. So that was my favourite books of 2016 list. I've read so many amazing books this year, and I know I'm going to read so many amazing books next year too. So let me know in the comments your favourite book of the year, if you can narrow it down. I know it's incredibly hard, and I will see you guys soon. Happy reading!